to do that, to sort of basically set up a conversation where we can look at what is better and how to get there, I'm going to talk about three things. And first of all, just taking stock around where we are now, and maybe some of the sort of characteristics, at least that I see, are pretty unique about now. It's a conversation we could have for days, and we're probably a little bit sick of talking where we are, but nevertheless. Then I'm going to tell a few stories around what better could look like, and then wrap up with some ideas in terms of what are the conditions which enable us to actually get towards better. So taking stock, 7 months, the world's changed somewhat, and tragically in that time, more than 1 million people globally have lost their lives. That figure is probably far higher due to these being officially recorded deaths. And I think there's a sense of fatigue coming in, and also the experience of COVID is becoming very different depending who you are and where you are in the world. The experience between Australia and New Zealand isn't probably too far away, but nevertheless, it still is very different. I think there's been a lot of fatigue that's crept in, and there's almost a sense of like, you know, how do we're talking about building back better already, but the reality is we're not out of it yet. This is still going on. The number of confirmed cases is still going up on a daily basis. In Australia, we have had a bigger health impact than New Zealand. Not almost 1,000 people have lost their lives, but that's still very low compared to most countries in the world. But we're just starting to sort of get a sense of the economic impact of COVID. So the national unemployment rate is now about 13%. For entry-level positions, there's about 100 job seekers, competing for those places. Worryingly, looking ahead, superannuation funds have been gutted. About 500,000 people have cleared out their retirement savings. There's an estimation that GDP will fall about 7% this year. I think the global prediction is there'll be an economic contraction of about 8%. Just to put it in context, the economic contraction from the global financial crisis about 0.1. And we are looking at unprecedented levels of public debt. So the budget just came out last week in Australia, and they're modelling it to be around $1 trillion by 2024. Perhaps counterintuitively with those figures, I've been really interested in this data point as well. And it's basically comparing number of bankruptcies last year compared to the number this year. And the ones in red are the ones this year. So actually there's been far less businesses going out of business this year, last year, which suggests that the injection of public funds has not only kept businesses afloat as we get through the disruption, but it's also propping up a lot of businesses which would have probably fallen over naturally. So we kind of got this double whammy. When we come out of this, we're going to have to deal with the aftermath of COVID itself, but also a whole heap of stuff which has probably been artificially kept going, and that could deepen the economic impact. The second point I want to make is the systemic nature of this. And again, I think everyone on this call will be familiar with this, but the fact that the health crisis has become an economic crisis, which is becoming a social crisis. And some real worrying points around how these external shocks and recessions tend to deepen inequality. So the experience of the hardship is not equally distributed. It usually falls on those who are more vulnerable to start with. Some data points from the Brisbane floods back in 2011, within a year, those who were doing well before were sort of back up and running, but those who were vulnerable were getting further left behind. And some of the new data points coming out around the shape of recovery is this idea of a K-shaped recovery, whereas for a lot of people, there's been disruption, but their experience, economic experience of day-to-day hasn't actually changed that much, but it is accruing significantly at the lowest earners and those who are most disadvantaged. And of course, that's reinforced across lines of gender, age, geography, and race. So this idea that sort of systemic shocks play out in unknowable ways, that they tend to sort of have very unequal impacts. And I'm sure many of you have seen this diagram. What we're experiencing now is perhaps one of just many to come that we are facing. So we are working in a sort of very much a systems context in terms of how we got to think and respond to these impacts. Pretty much the last point I want to make in terms of taking stock is there is no normal. So this sense of sort of getting back to where we were, or the sense that there was some kind of ongoing status quo, I think it's a complete myth. I love these graphs. They kind of really reveal this kind of sense of profound development that we've had as a civilization over the last 200 years in the age of sort of modern state and the modern corporation. And incredible things have been achieved in that time. But if you look at it from any kind of distance, it just looks like an explosion, and it's highly dynamic, and you can map any other number of indicators or changes onto a similar exponential path. Of course, a big driver of this has always been technology from steam engines, but now the type of technology we're dealing with is really going into unprecedented spaces, be that quantum computing or artificial intelligence, and particularly general artificial intelligence. But we're also seeing exponential change in terms of the power associated with this technology. So during the recession, pandemic, we saw Apple the first $2 trillion company, which is significantly larger than GDP of most nation states. So unprecedented territory in terms of power and influence as well. And we talk a lot about the future of work and how automation will affect livelihoods in the future. But I think it goes a lot deeper than that. I think we all already have to start to accept that the ways we organize economy, society, is effectively legacy infrastructure. And so when we are thinking about building back, it's not just a case of we don't know how necessarily when this is going to end. It's not just about the other systemic shocks that we have to prepare for. We're working in a highly dynamic environment. And this kind of squiggle from the Zemsar from the exponential view, I kind of think is quite sort of profound graphic, because he's saying, look, we don't know the shape of the recovery, but it's not going to be two-dimensional. No matter the shape of the recovery, it's actually going to shift to a different place entirely. So we have to work within that context. So there's this kind of sort of sense of VUCA. You know, the situation we are building from is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And, you know, that's the nature of where we are. So what could better look like? So our hypothesis has been, and you know, we're not alone in this, but if the challenges we face are interconnected, our responses have to be too. And an idea of better, we could look at recognizing the interconnected nature of the world and its independencies, and really think about better as a model of economy which really focuses on creating more value and destroying less. So this kind of notion of, you know, externalities, I think, you know, external to what? This is a crowded world, and you can't externalize impacts or destruction of value. We have to start to think more holistically about the economy and recognize that the economy works well when it's within a stable social context and within a stable environmental context. So there's lots of talk around things like the circular economy now, which we kind of understand as kind of, you know, minimizing extraction and waste from a point of view of materials, but we have to add social and cultural on top of that as well. And at that point, we can start to think about a regenerative economy. And the SDGs, I think, are helpful in this context. They start to articulate an outcomes framework, a new way of measuring progress, you know, global to local, which enables us to really think about this kind of more holistic approach to value creation. So 3 stories of better around things which are already happening. And so we know that better is possible. And I guess the questions that will come off the back of this is how do we get more of it? So first of all, better businesses. And the story that I want to tell here starts with B Corps, of which collective intelligence is one. And B Corps are businesses who commit to a broader range of value creation. They judge their performance around how well they're governed, how they treat their employees, their relationship to community, their environmental footprint and the social impact of their products and services. And, you know, organizations which achieve certified B Corp status are ones which are able to do this consistently across the board. A story which I'm really enjoying at the moment, just down the road from me in Brisbane, Outland Denim, so a garment manufacturer. And beyond reducing the impact of their whole supply chain, they're actually using their business model to create other forms of value. So they provide work for women with lived experience of sexual trafficking and slavery. And they use the business to create an environment which provides support and transition back into a dignified and more stable life. On top of that, they also advocate for reduction of waste throughout the supply chain. And they do that within the context of running a highly successful business. So these are not trade-offs. This is very much about force multipliers and not trade-offs. Beyond individual businesses, it's interesting to look about like the effect that better businesses could have within a economic context. So Michael, who is a bit of a guru around local economic development, did some modeling around the effects of B corporations in place. And in Baltimore, recognizing with better businesses treating their employees better and paying them more, the knock-on effect, not only in terms of the wage take-home for those workers, but that actually injected more money into the local economy, which created more jobs and indeed increased the tax take for the state as well. So better businesses having that kind of ripple effect. And another example of better businesses working together, and I think we can start thinking about this idea of value systems rather than just value chains. Move-In Feast was a coming together of social enterprises in Victoria, food-based social enterprises, and they focused on making sure that anyone who was living in disadvantage would not go hungry or would not get access to decent food. So they organized the whole system from farmers to logistics to producers to delivery outfits, and channeled significant, healthy, consistent food to many hundreds and thousands of families. What's interesting to me is that that was a COVID response, but this is now an economic system which can actually create value in multiple ways going into the future. Another interesting point around better businesses is they seem to sort of err towards greater levels of empowerment and ownership. So there seems to be sort of this rise of more employee-owned firms and some links to actually closing the productivity gap. I mean, it seems startling that it's almost an assertion you have to make that if you treat people better in the workplace, they might actually work harder. But nevertheless, a lot of the ways that we've been thinking about optimization, extraction, and more cynically exploitation have actually been pushing down productivity rather than enabling more people to participate. The last point I'll make on better businesses is that this isn't just about push, it's also about pull. And if we look at a lot of the sectors and economic opportunities in the future, without doubt, they are going to be in these blended value areas. So this isn't just something around sort of almost a altruistic view of the way the economy should go. It's actually a very pragmatic view that the business opportunities which we want to move into are the things which are also going to be aligned with better social and better environmental outcomes. The second story I want to tell is around better institutions. And by this, I'm thinking about things like universities, hospitals, museums, our social public infrastructure, and how we can actually get them to be more proactive as economic actors and create more value and more community wealth. A great story here is the University Circle Anchor Institution initiative in Cleveland, Ohio, which organized to respond to economic downturn in that city. And over the last 15 years, they've worked together to use all of their kind of resources and assets beyond the core things they do. So beyond a university just doing learning or research, How does it use its balance sheet? How does it use its procurement spend? How does it use its physical premises? And between those sort of 19 or 20 institutions, they're now channeling about $1 billion worth of procurement into the region. They have created spaces which have led to the incubation of getting on for sort of 50 new businesses, which have created, 700 new jobs or so. And they're also leveraging their balance sheet. So $100 million worth of investment has leveraged about 900 million from the private sector to upgrade the local public infrastructure. So things like affordable housing have been facilitated by a university and a hospital, thinking a little bit more sophisticatedly around how it sort of uses its resources. Some of the businesses they've created as well, not only being future orientated, but not just giving decent work, but actually giving ownership to people. So enabling people to have an asset which can appreciate in time. So one of the questions that we're actually working on at the university now is, how do we get more value in a time which is going to be fiscally constrained? How do we get more latent value out of the system? How can we get universities, but also other anchor institutions across Australia using their full economic power to create more community wealth? The last story I want to tell is around better civic innovation. And there's kind of a hypothesis here that trust is a direct enabler of innovation. Trust enables collaboration, which gives the possibility of more new stuff happening, and the ability to people to work together well on that stuff. And these data points come from the Enderman Trust Barometer. It's a great research survey to look at on an annual basis. But if you look where trust now lies, this is the Australian data set, but it kind of mirrors many countries and the global trend, that people are losing their trust in business and in government. And where a lot of trust actually resides is on a citizen level and also within a community level. So how do we unlock that latent capability from a bottom-up level to enable more civic innovation to take place? Some lovely examples are starting to come through now around neighborhood innovation. Now, this is kind of innovation in a kind of very specific micro level, but it's different from just sort of occasional community activities in a number of ways. Firstly, it's intentionally design-led by people for people. The second point is around a saturation of activity. So it's not just one or two things happening in a place. It's literally hundreds of things which are accessible, visible and useful to people who live in that place being available to them. And the third thing, tying back into one of the initial points, is it's technology backed. So technology being an enabler of this bottom-up organizing and innovating, and indeed the development of data trusts, which then actually become valuable in themselves in terms of being able to sort of direct and inform future innovation. A lovely example of this, and there are examples around the world, but the one I've been reading about recently in Dagenham in London, it's been going for 2 years, and they've got 146 projects up and running, from makerspaces to junior makerspaces to business incubators to urban agriculture. 146 projects up and running in a really kind of concentrated area. Another example of this kind of civic innovation, again, technology-backed, Beehive from Bendigo in Victoria, which has always had a very rich history around cooperatives, but Beehive creates virtual connections across community to build social capital and connection and support. But it's also creating a marketplace for, basically micro and community enterprises to trade with each other within a system rather than seeing the leakage for whole the value to California or elsewhere. So using technology to build on social capital to then create economic activity. So I think just to sort of wrap this portion up, the social capital piece in this is often overlooked by kind of the innovation ecosystem narrative, the economic ecosystem narrative, but it's an intangible asset, social capital. And I think it is the enabler of trust, it's the enabler of connectivity, and ultimately it's the enabler of value creation. The World Happiness Report, which is a serious report, it may be better framed the World Wellbeing Report, found that amongst many contributors, but the most significant contributor to well-being was connection and social capital. Equally, one of the things we realized through COVID is the real health impact, negative health impact of isolation. So, you know, this idea of building and creating social capital, both as a means to limit trauma and negative impact, but also being a generative and enabling force, I think is something we need to focus much more on. Okay, so yeah, there's a sort of nice quote there. I'll just leave that with you a second. But the two points, it feels as radical as it feels right. You know, that if we're going to tackle complex social challenges, then we need to nurture the communications between people. But the second point, I think, is even more powerful, that we've started to see citizens or citizen participation very much around kind of influencing decision making and service delivery. And perhaps we have not taken full advantage of our agency enough. And going forward into the world that we're entering, we're going to need all of the tools that we have access to. So this kind of activation of community and civic innovation is something which is highly complementary to innovation in the business world and also innovation in public institutions, which then enables government to come in behind and support that leadership. So how might we get there? So we all know that innovation is a driver, crisis is a driver of innovation. There has been any number of really kind of inspiring stories around how businesses, communities, institutions have responded to the pandemic. But I think the question is, how do you get beyond the here and now? How do you go from sort of crisis response into something which is actually longer term and more focused on system change? So how do you innovate for better in a highly uncertain environment and with a long-term time horizon? So the first point I would say is we have to be honest, and the whole idea that we can plan our way out of this, I think, is delusional. We do not know what the solutions will be, well, it will actually get us to better. And that's not to mean that, you know, everything goes to chaos, but we have to accept that this is about learning to better, not just building back better. We actually have to organize and create the future that we want in the context that we live, rather than just see this as a strategic planning exercise. The second point is in the same kind of way that I was speaking about regenerative economy is around blending value. We also have to sort of blend the sectors in society and the ways of working, the ways of creating value. This work, which has sort of come from Matthew Taylor at the RSA in the UK, he's been speaking long term about the sort of motivations for humans and for society as a whole in terms of sort of individualism, solidarity, and authority. And I think these kind of very complementary things have actually become wrapped up with ideology and seen as opposition to each other rather than things which actually need to work together, not just as sectors, but within any given context and with any organization. So how do we get better ways of blending rather than, you know, sort of expect one part of society or one approach to be more predominant? How do we blend those ways of working? Beyond sort of that sort of more organizational kind of interaction, I think there's also a case of thinking what are the capabilities and mindsets we need as individuals. So this idea of entrepreneurship is too narrow. Entrepreneurship, the ability to create, is something which everyone can possess and needs to possess, whether you're a prime minister, whether you're in primary school, whether you're a business leader. The idea of entrepreneurship being less around kind of this heroic model of creating stuff, moving fast and breaking things, to something which is fundamentally based in curiosity, creativity, and then innovation being an outcome of those capacities. And this is something that we need more of. We need to sharpen our skills, and we also need a distribution of this capability. So everyone in society needs to be supported to innovate and change the world around them, rather than it being a kind of, an elitist or exclusive, activity to be engaged in. Wrapping up now, just a couple more slides. In addition, we need to think about different ways of organizing. So we are going to be trying to solve some very complex problems. As I said, strategic planning, I don't think will work, but we still need a way of getting coherence. And there's a lot of interesting work that's developed around sort of mission-led approaches, which enable us to tackle sort of very complex issues, be it obesity or plastic promotions or reducing carbon. And it recognizes we can have a coherent goal and then identify the different things we need to transition in order to realize that goal. It then enables a conversation across stakeholders and various different impact projects and innovations which need to happen in order to contribute to missions. And again, the key point here is it's not planning. It has to be highly experimental. We don't know what's going to work, but we can have a sense of direction and where we want to get to. In addition, we need an infrastructure for innovation, in the same kind of way that public health infrastructure and universal education suddenly became, sort of available after the Second World War. If innovation and rapid change is our biggest challenge, then what is the infrastructure which enables more people at all levels to participate in innovation and create more value? So in the same way there's a school in every community, what would it look like to have innovation support available at an equal basis? Last of all, I think we need to think more deeply about the value of place. So some of this stuff can be a bit abstract. Things become tangible in place, things become real. You see the connections between people, environments, organizations, and infrastructure in place. And you have the advantage that you have more interconnection, you have more connection, you have more lever points, you have more spillovers, and you have skin in the game. And all those things, I think, are preconditions for good innovation. And it's interesting to see a number of these place-based initiatives, and this is just a tweet that I saw the other day, how Dunedin City Council are sort of signing up to work with the donut economics model, which has been used by Amsterdam and other places as a kind of framing. And I think it's kind of very akin to that mission-led approach, an overarching framework which thinks about this more holistic value creation. Oh, sorry, one more. And I promise this is it. I think the last question we've got to ask ourselves is, how far can we extend our empathy and responsibility? So we are in crisis recovery now, and our attention is necessarily going to be like how we get through the next few years. But looking ahead, there's over the next 50,000 years, this is from Roman Karsnik, his sort of a good ancestor thesis. There are a lot of people who have a right to experience this planet in a habitable and peaceful and stable way in the future. And we are, as incumbents, we have that responsibility not just to our immediate communities, but also those who are unborn and yet to come. And I think, so this idea of a longer term horizon is going to be really important as we move into the next stage of reform. So there's a few thoughts. What matters most to me, it's around the direction of innovation and the nature of value creation. And for me, that's around regenerative and holistic value. It's about the breadth of innovation. We have to think about innovating at all levels, all systems, and all sectors. We need to think about broadening participation in innovation and making sure we're harnessing the full capacity of society. And we have to think about equal participation in the benefits of innovation as well. If things are getting too unequal, and that creates social risk, even if you go beyond it being immoral. And last of all, we have to choose and act. And there's this lovely quote that sort of action is not a consequence of hope, but hope is the consequence of action. A hopeful future is a future where we actually choose to act and we start acting. I think that folds very nicely into your impact team's endeavour, Harv.
Thank you, Alex. Okay. So we've gone over time, and I was thinking, do I interrupt him? But you're in a nice flow there, Alex. And I'm going to open it up now to people just coming in with questions in the chat session. Alex, do you want to take down that that setting so we can see more people and get a bit of view? Thank you.
I'll hand it back to you as well.
Oh, I'm in charge. So, Alex, look, stunning overview, and I had the fortune of working with Alex a while ago in the Yunus Centre, developing some of the models and the thinking around this, and feel very privileged to patch in with this. The thing that really stuck out for me there, Alex, was the blending and the balance. And I think, what do we call that balance? Because at the moment, what I'm seeing, and we've got an election going on, is we've got these different ideologies, and we're fighting over ideologies of how we get ahead. And I look at that little balance between the three and go, what do we call that? That is a stunning space that if we can get to there. So I'm going to open it up now, and we've got a so we've got a question here. What do you think of collective impact as a tool?
I think it's look. I mean, I think the DNA of collective impact approaches is very much in this kind of body of thinking. It's a way of organising between different actors who have different strengths and assets and capabilities, but have common goals. And a lot of the challenges that we face are coordination problems. The fact that we can do incredible things, and technology is just a constant reminder of that, but we seem to misstep when trying to do some really basic things. So I think the collective impact model is part of the story, and as a framework to enable different people with different capabilities to create value together is really important. I guess one of the things which I would challenge around the collective impact model is the degree that it actually really allows bottom-up participation. And so whether it's a kind of coordination of agencies or service providers or organizations who then, effectively deliver stuff to beneficiaries, rather than sort of seeing something which is actually generally more participative and more emergent. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but I think one of the things that we haven't discussed enough is this idea of what does deeper and more active participation look like. And I think that's the thing which is really interesting. It's kind of the difference between...
Okay, I'm going to cut you off, Alex. I'm going to cut you off because we've got other stuff to go into.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything just to finish off on that topic?
Yes. I was going to say that it's the key difference between redistributing wealth and including more people in the generation of wealth and economy.
Which is a vastly different tool, right?
Which is a vastly different thing.
Cool. Okay. Next question, Alex, and this is something I'm really interested in, and it's come up a lot, is how does Alex suggest that we collectively influence government sufficiently to be less risk adverse, to be prepared and willing to invest in a regenerative future?
Look, the key responses to this is, I wonder if we reframe it and focus on leadership coming from business, civil society and public institutions, which demonstrate how things can be done differently. And that's not to work against government or outside it, but I think to rely on government and the reality of the way sort of government works within a kind of democratic system. It's just too hard to expect government to be pioneers and leaders. I think, when things can be proven to work, they can be enablers and facilitators, investors and supporters. But I think we actually have to spend less time campaigning against governments and more time thinking about kind of innovating from other parts of society. Of course, it can change if you get the right leader with, the right mandate, then who knows? But that's rare. And I think it's more fruitful to focus on taking action in other parts of society.
Okay, that's a new thought. Alex? I haven't heard that from you before.
Well, we were having a conversation with a state government department who are preparing for incoming briefings for the next government here in Queensland. And these are smart people that know what needs to be done, but they're just completely constrained in what they can propose. So it all boils down to building motorways pretty quickly.
So we've got a nodding from Ian Lees-Galloway.
Ian, I have, please, I have to say one sentence about this, and I completely agree with you, Alex. And it's actually what I'm hopeful that my career might transition from the frustration of politics to being able to get out into another environment where experimentation and change is more possible, because democracy works against experimentation and significant change, and not just democracy but the bureaucracy as well. So I'm very hopeful about the opportunities that exist within social enterprise to drive the change that we need.
Cool, thank you, Ian. So Ian, while you're there, you had a question.
Yeah, well, and it goes to this, and Tony might want to come in on the back of this as well. So what we're interested in, and what we're going to work with Harvey on over the next few weeks, is trying to get trying to make, I suppose, better business more visible to the consumers that are out there, and trying to enhance that conscious consumer movement to drive more change. And I suppose, so my question is, you made the point that better business needs to be visible, accessible and useful and present in community. What thought has gone into making better business more visible and accessible? Because as great as B Corp is, as great as other platforms are for demonstrating that businesses are better on all of the measures that we're talking about, it's not yet real for everyday consumers who have got a whole lot of other things going on in their lives to worry about. So I'm just curious as to what thought has gone into how we can make this an everyday experience and get consumers making, choosing better businesses on an everyday basis.
Going back to the Enderman Trust survey, there, if you look at what most people are saying about who they want to buy from or what they expect from business, it's almost like the attitude in people's mind is well advanced of actual behavior. So I think there is a juxtaposition between, what people say they want to buy and what they actually do buy. But the important thing is, like, it does seem that consumers and sort of are shifting, and they're shifting quite rapidly. I think there's a lot of things which can be done, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I'm not saying let's just leave government to it. I'm just saying let's have lower expectations to what government can realistically achieve. But I think there are things which also can be done at a local level and a place-based level. So going back to that idea of like B corporations in Baltimore, and there've been other campaigns where local chamber of commerce, local government have focused on raising the profile of better businesses very much in a very tangible sense in terms of businesses which are here. So a lot of the stuff which seems to be coming off now around sort of, buy local. And I think that can be problematic, because we don't want to become, sort of have a siege mentality to everything sort of, on the outside. But I think there's different ways to frame, buying for business when these businesses seem local. They seem to be making a direct contribution to my community and my life. So I wonder, in terms of stuff which might be done at a national level or a kind of whole sector level, more things, which are developed at a local level and a place-based level, I think, might be worth exploring more.
Tony, does that answer your question as well?
Yeah, I think it does. Thanks.
Phew. Okay. So Jade, we've got a really complex question from you, and I'm not going to read it out. I'm going to get you to think about simplifying that question, if you can, and asking it to Alex.
Tēnā koe, Alex, kia ora. It's been a while since we've seen each other. Yeah, I'm really interested in this whole idea of social innovation and co-design and designing with people, not for people. And I guess prior to this role, I was at the foundation, a philanthropic foundation, around ethnic diversity. And we're really looking at how do we co-design with marginalized communities to create system level change. We had been connecting with people at local government level, central government level, and then how might we actually resource that appropriately over the long term. So just if you've seen any examples, I would love to hear from them, but no, this is really challenging as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, and Jade, I mean, you'll be aware of some really good examples of practice, and there are many examples, but it kind of exists in pockets, I think, and it's under-resourced and it's incomplete. And so I guess the idea of if we want to emphasize how we create more stuff and we're more generative in terms of the range of challenges we have to face, this going back to this idea of starting to think properly about innovation infrastructure and what are the things which need to be present, what are the spaces, places, containers, platforms, resources, people with the right capabilities, you know, how do we start to invest in that to actually make the likelihood of good innovation working well more, you know, increased. And, you know, Harv, I remember speaking to you before about Indy Johar speaks about this thing called the ice cream economy, that the majority of kind of countries spend less on innovation than they do on ice cream. And, you know, so, but one of the things that does give me a little bit of hope, and I suppose you do need government at the table for this though, but there have been these profound sort of jumps in, oh, you know, well, people need good shelter. Oh, well, actually universal education. Well, you know, the fragility of the Second World War and maybe a public health, you know, sort of infrastructure is actually something worthwhile. I wonder how we evolve an argument for getting more value out of the system by enabling more people to participate and to be more creative and thinking about how that innovation infrastructure evolves over time. But again, going back down to, I think this is where, you know, universities are kind of shitting themselves at the moment because they've become very much kind of focused on, you know, international student fees, and they've had a monopoly and they haven't been really disrupted. They have a rich role to play in society, but I think that's, you know, is going to be different. And, you know, thinking about the resources they have, the premises they have, and working with people that have been doing this work as intermediaries or practitioners more closely, I think is a good place to think about seeding the basis for that infrastructure.
Cool, thanks, Alex. Now we've got a question here, or a statement from the Venture Centre, saying that you've contradicted yourself on one of your slides. So Venture Centre, can you please develop that?
If I only did that once, that's a win.
Okay, they've gone quiet. Venture Centre, do you want to? No? Okay. So, no, I need you to speak. I'm not going to. Okay, so we're moving on. Paul, did the question for a deeper dive? Okay, yes, it did. Paul, so Paul Metcalf, for a deeper dive into the content, do we start with the Yunus Centre provocation series? Question to you, Alex.
That provocation series was specifically on impact investment. So it's quite sort of a narrow part of the overall picture. Probably the best place to start was the roadmap to recovery and regeneration, which really sort of sparked a lot of this thinking around, you know, better in the context of COVID. So Harv, I can send you the link and you can send that around afterwards.
Okay.
if we had our time again, we wouldn't have called it a roadmap. You know, so you know, in some ways it feels out of date already. But what we do try and do in it is basically propose a mission-led approach to recovery and regeneration, and think about what are the things that we need to get right to enable, you know, sort of a regenerative recovery to take shape. So, and we also, to Jade's point, we speak a lot about that this isn't just the what we do, it's very much about the how we do it. And there are some sort of thoughts on that as well. So I'll send the link to you.
Yeah, and Alex, I mean, I can see the difference from between when we engaged a few months ago with developing this to where you are now, and the acknowledgement of going, we do not know what the future looks like. And I talked to a CEO of a company, a large company this morning, going, you know, we're in this state now and we just need to be really agile and nimble because we've got no idea what our future looks like. And we're having to be really comfortable with that. And settle into that and to update all the time and observe like crazy what is going on. Yeah, so it's a whole different mindset. Okay, mindful of time, guys, and we were going to try and confine this into an hour, and there is a hell of a lot to get through in that time. I'm going to see if there's any one last question that's burning right now. And I'm going to take that as a good sign that there is an Alex. Good work.
Sorry, one last question. Innovation and infrastructure in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Can you point us to someone who's created a systems map around this? There's probably someone that's done
it. No, okay. I don't know. I mean, I know sort of Jamie Newith's done a fair bit of work, and also I've forgotten her name, Rebecca. Is it Rebecca? You know,
Rebecca Mills?
Yeah. But
that's impact investment, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's probably sort of a piece of work which probably needs more attention, as it does everywhere.
Cool. And Alice, people coming in here and thanking you for the content. It was, you know, it's funny. I don't like taking in. I can't take in too much at once. And the thing that I really grasped me today were those 3 dissecting triangles, which are different, and that little piece in the middle, that's really got my imagination. What is that piece in the middle? And because anybody, what I saw from that diagram, anybody from the different views can play in that space, you know, and yeah. So, so guys, thank you very much for patching in. This is the first of a series, and I say that having no idea who's speaking next, but we've got a few people lined up on specific areas. This one I wanted to open it up to see, to set the scene on a bigger context, which Alex has done beautifully, and then looking at specifics. And if you've got any ideas of speakers, we've got a couple we're working on at the moment. One is around the food industry, but yeah, really interested to hear from you if you've got other speakers for this lunchtime series to dig into this. We also bring the roadshow around New Zealand, and some of the topics that came up today, Alex, we covered on Tuesday at the Hamilton lunch. There is lots of frustration out there and a real hunger, I think, to do things differently, which is really cool. But we need to connect and work together on this. So because I'm such a wonderful tech person and facilitator, our time is up, and thank you for patching in. Somebody said, wish there were more people here. It's always the way, but we've got it recorded, and yeah, fabulous. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, and we're going to get that. Alex, you've got the recording, and I'll leave Bettina to do her thing and how we get that out.